How do you think AI will replace our jobs?
If I look at economic history, I have kind of two points I can reference as possibilities.
We're gonna be dependent whether or not the government gives us something. Wait, sorry. So this is what you're saying. You either are rich or you work for the rich, right?
I hope that in the end of days, all this suffering is made well by Jesus' love and so on and so forth.
What do you think will be the effects of losing that?
Young women tend to be tending more left politically. Young men, at least, seem to embrace more conservative or right-wing positions. Well, in order to have a human being, we need both a young man and a young woman to get together. There can be consequences to abandoning the way things have been done in the past, and they don't seem to all be great.
Yeah.
So,
Hello everyone, welcome to Season Gen Z, where we'll be covering our past and maybe what our future looks like. And today we have Todd Myers, a consultant, administrator, director of the Institute for Social, Political, and Economics Research, which I read some of his papers and they were very, very interesting. But the reason I reached out to him was because he's a professor at SDSU teaching economic of the history of the United States of America. So welcome to Hugging My Chaos. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How have you been, my friend?
I've been pretty good. We had deep conversations before starting this, so that was interesting.
It really was. It was kind of nice to get the ball rolling and things like this.
First question. Okay, so I actually cut the first half of the interview, so we're gonna continue on talking about competition and technology. Enjoy.
Fair. Many people will say they don't want to settle, and that will create a lot of ambition, and you'll have to compete with all the other people who don't want to settle. And then the question will be whose energies eventually triumph, because which is a struggle of sorts, right? And then what kind of tools do you use to struggle? Do you use some sort of technological tools? Like, for example, I see a lot of people getting computer science degrees right now. And I guess they're struggling with, am I going to be the one who masters the algorithms or something along these lines that can do a lot of work? Because algorithms can do a lot of work. They become a super multiplier. And so that's why people in these industries, like working on artificial generative intelligence, can have the potential to make huge profits because that industry can basically is very scalable. It can do a lot of stuff at some point once it gets established.
Yeah, because the use of technology, right? Which is something that I wanted to talk to you about. How do you think AI will replace our jobs, or do you think it's going to replace or enhance them?
Yeah, people don't really know what's going to happen in this. That like I was just reading something from the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and she's giving talks on AI, and I guess she's in Silicon Valley, so she's at the heart of much of this innovation, right? And she says nobody knows exactly how this is going to impact our lives. And I think she's right. If I look at economic history, I have kind of two points I can reference as possibilities. One of the points is that artificial intelligence creates a more robotic economy. Higher minimum wages, for example, make it more attractive to replace workers with machines. And so then we start to have a high unemployment rate, but our economy continues to be productive overall. And then, so how do you make that society work, where you have a lot of people who aren't working, and you're able to actually do this sort of stuff? That would be really socially problematic. You'd have to figure out something to do. And wow, do I really want to live in a world? And I haven't lived in that world. I've lived in a world where I've been able to work, contribute to my family, have meaning, and all this sort of stuff. And in that I get to be a provider. How would I feel like if it were just about relations? Somebody would actually give me some sort of stipend, and I would just have to navigate my relations with I don't know if I'd evolve in that environment, because I'm a worker. I focus on things. I'm not a particularly sensitive. I am kind of a sensitive human being, but I'm not particularly good at telling people what they want to hear. And I go, now I'm in a world where I have to deal with relations. That would be a real weird world. And I'd also have to have somebody willing to give me a stipend off of the huge productivity, because somebody would control property rights in those technologies and have patents in those technologies. And then I'd be dependent upon politics to somehow get me access to food, shelter, and all this stuff. That would be a very weird world. It would be not completely different from what today is, but a little bit weirder than it is currently.
Wouldn't that be like, wouldn't you not have control of you anymore? Because I feel like
that's the thing. That's the attractiveness of our, at least the idea of the American dream. It was the attractiveness for those pioneers who first came here, that they'd have land and wouldn't have to be somebody else's serf, employee, whatever. That was attractive. The American dream, where people could actually accumulate enough wealth to have their own home, take care of basics, raise their kids, and all this sort of stuff, gave them that particular dignity. But when you become dependent upon the productivity of others, you lose your dignity to a certain degree, or you lose your place in the world. And that's a bit frightening. Now, some economists tell us that's an overly glum vision of the world, perhaps. I can actually make it glummer. Instead of actually getting a portion of the production that's made, you will be excluded from it unless you can pay rents. And then what happens when people can't rent space to live on? You see how people treat homeless people now. They're not really deeply respectful to them, are they? They're afraid of them. They shun them. They think there's something wrong with them, and they don't. And though progressive people try to help and give shelters, they're not particularly good at enhancing or preserving the dignity of those people.
And that's what I'm thinking. Like, once you said that, in a way, we're gonna be dependent whether or not the government gives us something. Like, I feel like that's a very risky place to put ourselves, because we don't know that's gonna happen. Exactly, they might not
give us anything, right? And see that becomes kind of the problem. So that's a scary side of technology developing, but it could also be very positive. This is kind of the other vision that we can have.
Let's switch the perspective.
Because the vision we just presented, that becomes very glum. And like, for example, I lived in Brazil, in Latin America, and what I can see is there was a really significant difference between the poor and the wealthy there. And crime rates are relatively high. I think they have very high murder rates.
Yeah.
Something like 60 per 100,000, where we're something like 5 per 100,000. So there's a lot of tensions there. And I saw a lot of poverty. I saw a lot of begging. I saw like riots when the bus fare would go up by a 25 cents or something like that or so. So because people were desperate, they need food and all these things. And I guess in really socially stratified situations where some people have it all and other people don't have anything, that's a very unpleasant circumstance. So I guess, so that's kind of the vision I have about kind of a dystopian bureaucracy overall, leading to conditions like that. That's my greatest fear. But to be hopeful, usually when we introduce new technologies, that might increase the value of workers.
How so?
Because the worker becomes more productive. Because with new technologies, workers become more productive. That could increase their overall value. Now,
but I don't think all the workers are going to become productive. I just feel like the workers that work on technology, right?
I think you're right. So the very rosy, optimistic ideal is that workers become more productive, and as they become more productive, they get paid more money. And for the other people who were kind of left on the side, who weren't part of the technological revolution, maybe what they do is they become more innovative and creative to be able to meet the needs of these now newly highly productive workers, and that's how they get access to cash and the ability to live their own lives. So that's kind of the optimistic scenario, that the market itself incentivizes people to become creative, solve their own problems, and just because we have a new technology present just means we make more stuff. And then the way people get access to that more stuff is by meeting the needs of the people who are getting paid more for being more highly productive. Which I guess in the Brazilian context, it might mean that the house I lived in, they had 5 servants or so. So I didn't grow up with 5 servants here. I think my mom had a lovely woman named Mrs. Purcell, who would come and clean maybe once a month with her, and it was kind of a very egalitarian sense. Oh, she'd clean before Mrs. Purcell came to help clean and things like this, and then they would all eat lunch together and things like that. And that was kind of that situation. Whereas I guess in Brazil there were just more people as kind of house servants and things along these lines. And is that what the economy would be like? I guess if you're working for a very rich person, you might get paid a lot of money to be a butler or something along those lines.
Wait, sorry. So this is what you're saying. You either are rich or you work for the rich, right?
Yeah.
If not, you're gonna be.
Or you could have creative ways of meeting the needs of the poor who are empowered by working with the rich, because then or there could be black markets and things like this, where you move into kind of illicit behaviors that probably are serving the interest of the rich, who are doing drugs or something like that aren't permitted by law, but they are somehow desired by people who have resources. So you get this kind of economy that's not hugely different than the economy we have, but it's built upon market principles and creativity and innovation, higher levels of productivity. And Lord knows, we might have higher standards of living at that point in time, but we're forgetting about something. The thing we're forgetting about is how we're ultimately dealing with questions about the more stuff that we make, the more we heat the planet up, and how we might ultimately reduce the planet's productivity by making it too warm.
Oh, shoot. So that's another problem
that's a variable we have to think about, right? So we can't only think of, and for example, artificial intelligence technologies, they tend to be very energy intensive. And as we tend to try to make the world more legible to artificial intelligence technologies, we have these data storage centers and things like this that need a lot of cooling and get very hot and things along these lines. And so they would be maybe factors that, if they were more widely distributed, would be disadvantageous to our overall climate. And so our puzzles are complex. So we can't, if we look at one of them, we can be optimistic and say, which I guess my optimistic picture wasn't that optimistic. It wasn't really that optimistic, was it? But it was saying that people could have some autonomy.
Like there's a way out, right?
That they would have some autonomy and choice and things along these lines. Because I think life is always hard. I think not to give pity parties to the rich or anything like that, but for example, King Charles, with his recent red portrait, he's getting flack from the entire world because of this painting that was done by him. He's an old man with cancer. Life is hard, and he's probably one of the richest people on the planet. So I don't think at this point I don't think I'd change my position with King Charles III in England. So money doesn't solve all the human problems. I think sometimes we use it as a fantasy, where we think we solve all of our problems, and so it's like a delusion.
But I feel like money, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like money gives you, like, in this sense, gives you control of things, control of you,
It gives you more options.
More options, yeah.
But your control is not perfect, is it? because cancer is something you can't control, right? Maybe you'll be able to
But you
live
can go to
longer.
like a very expensive place where they can like treat you better or something.
You'll be treated better while you feel miserable.
Mm.
I'm like, I don't know how much that additional good treatment actually changes the condition, and so yeah, so I'm and this is so the fact that we're in this human condition that's very challenging with multiple parts of the puzzle moving seems to be just the truth. We're in this kind of struggle. We're trying to figure out how to make things work. Sometimes we make it better. And I think when we're doing peaceful transactions like trading, we're specializing, we're thoughtfully incorporating technology to improve our lives and things like this. We're moving in the direction of making things better, not perfect. It'll still be a struggle and things along these lines. I tend to have like metaphysical faith. Like I tend to go, well, I hope that in the end of days, all this suffering is made well by Jesus's love and so on and so forth. But that's kind of a metaphysical faith. And in some ways, that metaphysical faith allows me to deal with the many unsatisfactory things that life gives us. Now, Gen Z is interestingly has become less religious. I think the millennials became less religious and things.
What do you think will be the effects of losing that? Because Gen Z is losing that a lot, according to research.
Well, I think it puts a brake on our anxieties. I think it puts a brake on our depression. I think it puts a brake.
Losing religion?
No.
Oh.
Losing it. I think religion actually puts a brake on many of these bad things.
Okay.
So if we lose it, we've lost something that was incredibly valuable. And we didn't think of it as being incredibly valuable at the time, but when we don't have it, we will recognize how valuable it was. It puts a brake on greed, for example. So the fact that I just, like at some point, if I go, well, I've got to make another $2 billion, and I'm like going, and I'm going to build some ridiculously expensive ice castle or something somewhere with my $2 billion. Somebody else might say, people are starving to death. Why are you building a ridiculous ice castle? If I have a Christian faith, or I'm in a society with a Christian faith, everybody starts to go, maybe that's right.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't build the ice. Maybe you might want to try to build affordable housing for people, and then you'll get status. We'll say you're a great person because you helped house the poor, or something like this, and which will fulfill the ego need of the individual, but it does it in a pro-social manner. And that's partially because every one of us has a certain amount of dignity, at least according to the Christian tradition.
I see your perspective, and I do agree with your perspective. But let me go back to the economic aspect, and we were talking about the rich and poor. Can we talk about the income inequality? Is it true that the gap between rich and poor is becoming like wider?
Well, in 2022, the gap between the rich and the poor briefly became less. But one of the things is I would expect that the gap between the rich and the poor would become wider, and it has over time. So it's not anything I'm speculating about. So wage earnings for the average kind of worker or something like that remain pretty flat. Whereas a lot of the gains in the economy in terms of economic growth have been going to the top 1%, 10%, and things along these lines. Productivity gains, workers have become more productive, but they've been getting a less share of that productivity gains in terms of their own salaries. So that's been happening. The things that often reduce inequality are sometimes bad things, though. So sometimes you'll have like a stock market collapse. That will reduce inequality because the wealthy people often have a large amount of value in stocks. And if the stock market collapses, that value disappears, and therefore the gap between the rich and the poor becomes more narrow. During war, often wars often create a more equal society as well, and things along these lines. So equality isn't necessarily good. It sometimes is a representation of some bad things. Now, my friends I have a friend who likes to think about this, and he likes to say, well, there are fewer people in the middle class now, but there are actually more people who are rich. And there are more people who would be poor subsequently. So that middle would be eroding. And then the question becomes not whether it's bad to have rich people or not. The question becomes, are poor people now living better lives? And like, for example, if you look at kind of the media devices people have, like almost everybody has phones right now, right? Everybody has some sort of access. Almost everybody has some sort of access to the internet and things like this. The King of France did not have as many music choices as the average McDonald's worker does today. Right? And entertainment choices are great. The King of France's carriage is not as fast as somebody's Kia or something along these lines. So if somebody has like a Kia, a little small car, kind of or Swatch car, whatever the smallest, crappiest car you can imagine, that's faster than the King of France's, Louis XIV. So let's give him his carriage and things like this. So you look at those things and you go, is that what the economy's doing? Is it creating new goods and services that ultimately enhance the quality of our life? And then they would say the question of greater inequality or lesser inequality is irrelevant. The question becomes, what are the absolute standards of living that people are experiencing? They would put that there. So that's one perspective. I'm more concerned about dignity often. And so I think like, for example, I think at one point in my classes, I did an equation where I figured out that based upon my salary, Bill Gates was equivalent to 67,000 of me. And I go, as smart as Bill Gates is, I'm certain 2 or 3 or 4 of me might be able to think more efficiently than Bill Gates. I think that might be true. And I'm certain, as strong as Bill Gates might be, I'm certain maybe one of me or maybe 1.5 of me might be able to defeat Bill in combat. I'm almost certain of that. And so there's a lot of equality here. And I think, why does this one man have so much influence in our society? Because of the dollar votes that he gets. And I go, there will always be some sort of inequality there that in many ways just seems simply unjust, right? Because according to my Christian ideals, I'm created in the image of God. You're created in the image of God. Wow, that's as equal as we get, right? That's Now I know that's not the case on planet Earth. I know there are people who are capitalists. They have more money. And I know that some people are just more productive, so they will produce more. So I had a friend who, when we had to build tables at work, he built 5 tables and we built 1. And he just went boom, 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 boom. I'm going, well, he's 5 times more productive than us. And if we were only building tables, I would say he should get probably 5 times more money, or at least
more than you.
More, right? But if people were saying, well, since he's 5 times more productive than you, Todd, you don't get to eat, I would go, I can kill him. And so you don't want people to think that either. So at some point, you have to figure out some sort of social negotiation. It can be done in markets because that's a social entity where people go, how much do I have to pay these people who are working for me before they don't hate me and have complete contempt for me, or I don't hate them and have complete contempt for them? And I think that's an emotional component of how we distribute resources that doesn't get talked about a lot. But I think that sense of human dignity and how people negotiate these issues out becomes very important, because I think some people like to talk about other people as if they are the gum on the bottom of their shoe.
So what I'm trying to get is that the standard of living hasn't really changed. In fact, it has improved. However, what we're losing here if we stay like on the bottom is dignity and unfair treatment.
Potentially, right? Depends what your society says is the norm. So there are society, I guess there could be a society that would say there's no shame in being a janitor. There's no shame in being a farmer. There's no shame in any of these things. They all need to be done. I think during the pandemic, my son, he was working at the grocery store. People needed people to work in the grocery store, and they worked those people to very hard, and they were on the very front lines of doing things. We need groceries. We need these commodities. And previously, maybe 5-6 years earlier, I was in a let's say a health club, and I was exercising, and somebody was saying how they didn't want to have grocery workers get healthcare benefits. And I'm thinking, wow, those people are very useful. And I've got somebody here who feels completely confident that they can say that in a public place as if that's their legitimate position, because they don't want to actually pay maybe slightly higher prices for whatever. And I interrupted with them. I go, well, I do think they deserve healthcare benefits. And I don't like higher prices and things like this. But in some ways, it's recognizing that you should be if we have a system of health that's difficult to get into and extraordinarily expensive and can bankrupt you and ruin your life if you are unfortunate enough to have certain circumstances happen, maybe we should try to share that risk on a broader level and protect the people who are actually contributing to the society.
But that doesn't happen, right? It doesn't
well, it's
happen.
hard to do, right? Because obviously it's just like, because I think the way I think doesn't mean everybody else will agree with me. Many people think they don't deserve health care. Personally, since I'm a teacher, professor, and all this stuff, I go, I've got good benefits. I think I would be remiss to argue that other people don't deserve more security. I don't know if we have the resources for it completely. We spend like 1/5 of our GDP on healthcare, and so we're probably one of the more inefficient countries in terms of providing healthcare services and all that stuff. But I become like, when I think about it, I go, how can I, who I'm teaching maybe 1/3 of the population or so, being exposed to the top 1/3 of the population, how can I not advocate for the dignity of every human being when because I guess I have some moral or spiritual authority.
I see. Yeah, I think there's so many. What I'm hearing is that you want equality, right? It's important to have equality, but like if you look at the reality of the world, you see that there's
forces that are moving towards inequality.
And now that
those forces are sometimes good, like technological innovation.
But now that we talked about AI, we see that maybe in the future it's gonna be harder for us.
It could become worse.
It could become worse, right?
Yeah, no, it's almost certain to become worse because, as I said, these various centers that AI produces to make everything legible, data becomes a commodity, manipulating the data, doing the algorithms to try to figure out what's going to happen to the data becomes costly. Who's going to be able to pay those prices? Very wealthy people. What would additional information do to enable to help you to preserve your wealth or expand your wealth? And the people who didn't have that information, what kind of disadvantage would they be at? They would be at a severe disadvantage. So we would have a tendency again to concentrate wealth, to have more wealth concentrated. Now there may be limits to what information can do in the economy.
What do you mean?
Well, right now we think, wouldn't it be great to just know everything, right? But at some point, what might become more valuable is somebody could do something. So people actually who are plumbers, electricians, and all this sort of stuff become very valuable because they can actually do stuff. So once you've identified whatever you think is the problem in some place, you then need people to do stuff. You need people to build stuff. You need people to act. So in a sense, even though information will be valuable, it will not eclipse the value of people who actually do things.
Like innovating?
Well, no, I'm not even innovating. Just the need to do things, to do the ordinary things of daily life or so, to fix plumbing, to wire electricity,
to solve the problems,
to actually make things work. And we're going to need people like this, right? So So that gives us some hope that the extreme kind of elites will have to be putting money into places where people learn to do things
I feel
and
you,
things
yeah.
like that. So that's a break. So we don't need to get like completely apocalyptic about the future, because the realities of Earth means that things matter. Some things matter more than information.
Something, yeah.
So
But you mentioned this. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that creativity is gonna be a useful skill for many of us.
yeah, no, I think that would be a great thing to be creative at. But guess what? With the Chat GPT and things like this, they're painting pictures right now.
Yeah.
They're doing many things that are very creative. Maybe writing musical scores and all these things. They might not be great.
But they're improving. They're gonna improve.
But they might very well may improve and things like this. And then what happens when these tools are so creative?
Yeah.
I'm like going that we still have that material reality in which we live, we breathe, we eat, we build, we make things, and all this sort of stuff. So those things will are going to remain important. So people may be overexcited about ChatGPT or artificial intelligence in some ways. They may overinvest in it or something along these lines, which historically that's what often happens is people get excited about a new technology.
Yeah.
The new technology holds promise to improve many conditions. They have to figure out how to use those technologies. Some people use them better or not. They get
Take advantage of it.
They are more capable at manipulating the technology. And some people are less adept at it, but money flows into all different sectors. So some people's money going into artificial intelligence will inevitably go into probably a bad company or many bad companies. Those bad companies will collapse. And then we'll have financial crises or so, because people who thought they were going to be really rich will all of a sudden discover, oh, artificial intelligence is good, but it's not as good as I thought it was going to be.
There might be a crash in the economy, and then
right. And we also have the material conditions of the environment we have to think about as well. And presumably, according to most climate scientists, anthropogenic global warming is something we're doing. So human activities do shape the atmosphere, and the quality of the atmosphere is very important for our well-being. So we have to think about things like that as well.
So there's so many things coming into play, right? Like for the future. So like AI, the income inequality, then environmental issues. So it's gonna be interesting.
And there's one more I'll give you.
One more.
The kind of crazy politics the globe is experiencing right now. So we have all sorts of geopolitical threats. We've got war in the Ukraine. We've got war in Gaza and things along these lines. We have the potential of war in the Korean Peninsula. We have potential of war in the South China and East China Sea and things along these lines. We have populist political leaders coming up who are in many ways the embodiment of selfishness and aggression. Whether it would be in a country like Brazil, where they had, I guess, Jair Bolsonaro for a while now. I guess they've got Lula da Silva. But he's probably a left-wing populist in some ways. So these people are trying to mobilize people on the basis of their passions and emotions and desires, are becoming very important political players. In the United States, for example, we have Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, which that's probably nobody's fantasy election to a certain degree. If you had 330 million people to lead you, and you were looking for somebody to emblemise what your culture was about, would you want either one of those people to represent you? And I'm deeply concerned. But those are the choices that seem to be there at this point in time. So what will that do to our politics?
You know what I also think is happening or is gonna happen in the future? We're gonna become more like divided, more. And you talked about this in your propaganda article, but we're gonna become like it's us versus them, all the time. So we're gonna be divided, like, and that's gonna create a problem, right?
So some of the oddest things that I've noticed, and this is one of the oddest ones, which is young women tend to be tending more left politically. Young men, at least, seem to embrace more conservative or right-wing positions. Well, in order to have a human being, we need both a young man and a young woman to get together, things like this, right?
Yeah.
But there's something interesting I saw even further here. So Gen Z had something like, I believe, 1/4 of its group identify as LGBTQ plus. And I'm going, that means that unless that plus is something I don't know about, that means that it's going to be difficult to reproduce more people, which this could be a good thing, this could be a bad thing. But for most societies that are trying to take care of an aging population, you need young energy. And so, like, if your generation doesn't reproduce itself, then you have to open yourself up to having more people from around the world come to the country to basically fill the slots that will be needed in the economy at that point in time. And then you deal with more cultural complexity about how people feel about one another and things like this. And it can always be managed, but it's not easy to manage these things. So that's a really big and significant thing for a Gen Z, because depending on how you manage gender and child procreation will depend on what political future you ultimately inherit, and how stable or how supportive things will be for you, unless the robots do it all for you or something like that. And I think the Japanese have tended to try to have robots do it all for them.
What do you mean robots do it all? Like
well, for example, as their population gets older, they're trying to incorporate more robots into taking care of their elderly people. So you have experiments in trying to have the cheerful robot that will talk to you when you're old. I'm going, I don't know if that's going to work. Maybe the only thing will talk to me will be a cheerful robot when I'm old.
But what I'm seeing from all of this is that, like, it's becoming like those science fiction movies where, like, basically robots, the technology is, like, in a way controlling you. And if you look at our lives, we're controlled already by our smartphones.
We have it all the time, don't we?
Yeah, like it's controlling
do you
what
ever
we watch,
not look at your smartphone?
Yeah.
What percentage of the day don't you have your smartphone?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm like, I left the house once without my smartphone. I went back to get it. One, and that's like over a decade or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. I feel like we don't want to be controlled, but we're slowly becoming controlled by the technology.
It tracks us. It knows where we're going.
It knows
what
we
desires
like,
and things like this. This will probably know when McDonald's needs to send me that coupon to tell me about that Big Mac. It will probably be on a very cold night when I'm going, wow, I'm very sensitive to the French fries and salt, all that stuff. It's going to do it. And then the question becomes, is that what's good for me? And then I'm going to have to go, God, Todd, you have to stop eating the Big Macs. You're 60 years old almost. You can't eat the Big Macs. It's going to clog your heart. But then I'll have another app say, walk this number of steps.
Exactly. And we're going to be depending, like, our whole life is going to be depending on, like, technology, because we're talking about, like, we're scared that we're not going to have that dignity of control of our lives.
But we're giving it up.
We're giving it up right now, like, literally.
And it's like, and see, on some level, like, let's see, if I go back to 1980 or something like this, 1980s, when I'm kind of a teenager like you, what did I do? God, I just hung out with people. I'd run. I'd watch TV occasionally. I'd go hang out with people occasionally and things like that. So, is my life really that different? Like, I remember sometimes, like, I'd play a board game by myself. That really sucks in terms of quality of entertainment versus what we have now with regards to video games and things like that, right? We've got very engaging stuff at this point. Are our nervous systems built for so much engagement? Because, like, I'm constantly engaged. Just a few days ago, I'm just, like, starting to go, God, this is just too much. I've got Gaza, I've got Ukraine, I've got inflation, I've got presidential politics, I've got East China Sea, I've got heat waves in the Philippines and things like. And I'm just like going, this is going to drive me nuts and things like this if I keep processing these things. And then all of a sudden I just go, okay, time.
McDonald's.
But do you know what I do then? I go to Netflix or I go to Prime and I go, I'm going to watch something like Carnival Row, a steampunk drama detective story with fairies and satyrs and all this sort of stuff. And I'm watching this, and it's doing a pretty good job of entertaining me. Yeah. And I go, that didn't exist so easily before. So what is our illness also seems to be producing our cures.
No, I feel like it's producing our distraction from our illness, you know? Like you're distracting yourself from reality by going into a fiction reality, you know?
But wasn't it like a fiction this is one of the things I've been thinking about, because we had some protests on campus, I think, about the pro-Palestinian protests and things like this. And I look at it and I go, okay, but isn't that a distraction from most people's lives there? And I go, how many people actually are connected to Israel, Palestine, who show up to those protests and things like this? I go, that's kind of a distraction. And then in a less kind of politically charged manner, I look at it like when I was a young kid, maybe your age, I was doing Lincoln Douglas debate, and I was doing things like extemporaneous speech. And I'd give these talks about world politics and things like this. What do they have to do with a kid in Canton, Ohio? I still do this stuff. Like I went to the school newspaper. I'd write about civil war in Angola and things along these lines. What were those things but diversions from my own life? What were the most significant things from my own life? The most significant things from my own life. Am I going to find somebody to date? Am I going to get a job? Am I going to am I going to be starting on the football team? Things like this. Or what am I going to do here? My friend's an idiot and drinks too much. So things like this, right? You get those are the real things. Those are the things I would have the most of control over. And how much control over those things did I have? Control over those things was very limited. So whether I was going to start the football team, God, the genetics already were working against me. I wasn't going to be the one starting on the football team.
Oh, so you're saying that you didn't have control of
the things that were most immediate to me, that I have the most, theoretically, I have the most control over.
But I feel like you did have more control of those things rather than the big things.
Yeah, absolutely, I did. That's the kind of key element. So I'd be out there and I'd be running sprints, and I got my sprint time down to something like 4:07 or something like that for a 40-yard dash. That was as good as it was going to get for me. I wasn't going to get into the category where somebody's going 4.5. That was an impossible place for me to be. But I pushed myself from maybe 5 to 4.7, which was what I could do. So I did improve myself by focusing on what I could do. It wasn't probably enough to get me that starting role in the football team, but it did make me much faster than other people of my size and capabilities and things along those lines. So I go, okay, that's not too bad. But we often flee what we have the most control over to places where we're in kind of fantasies right now.
Yeah.
And so when I was young, international relations was kind of a fantasy, really. I did eventually work with a Secretary of State, so it wasn't that far off from what would happen for me. But initially, it was kind of a fantasy, and it was a kind of a distraction.
Because that's how I see. That's like when I was looking at Gen Z, I started to get overwhelmed because I was like, there's this and this, and there's so many things. But my friend told me, you gotta be able to know that it's okay, it's important to share this, it's important to share the knowledge, but there's so much you can do, and you gotta be able to just acknowledge that and accept that. Work on the things that you can do, but don't overwhelm yourself.
So all of a sudden, what becomes important for Gen Z is figuring out techniques to manage the massive amounts of information that you're going to be exposed to.
Yeah.
And which that requires judgment. Now, since you're younger, your judgment is limited. I think it takes until 25 before your prefrontal cortex gets wired and things like this. So it's harder to have good judgment. you're going to make mistakes. The technology world means sometimes your mistakes will be captured online forever. And people are sometimes not very forgiving to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, especially in this time, in this generation, I feel like we don't forgive the past.
Yeah, but you're probably going to learn to forgive the past.
Yeah.
Because at some point, there's going to be so much pain caused by how people think that this is the only way you're supposed to live, or anybody who does this it's completely wrong. There's going to be so much pain there that people are, in order just to live with one another, they're going to have to just eventually forgive one another. Or they could decide to become kind of nutty.
And more
violent and aggressive towards others. But how does that end? It never ends well. So.
Okay, so to end the episode, it was very informational. Let me give a conclusion, and let's see if you agree or not, and if you want to add more things. But basically, this is what I'm getting. Technology. I'm actually getting the negative perspective, kinda. Yeah.
Maybe. Right? Yeah. Like life's complicated.
Of course, right? We don't know how the story ends because we're still writing the story. But for now, from what I can see, is that technology is playing a big role in our lives, and it's gonna continue playing a big role in our lives. It's gonna help out the people who are either managing or taking advantage of it, and it's gonna make the people who are just getting distracted by it a lot like poorer in a way, potentially, which is gonna widen the gap. And even though we're gonna still be having better conditions than the past, the unity as a whole is gonna become more like wider, and that it's gonna impact the relationships, because like you said, and I totally agree with this, I see that a lot of like there's a gender difference even in political, you know, there's a that's gonna separate us, that's gonna separate and increase this division, which could create violence, and that could be the potential route we go.
Oh, interesting. One of the interesting things is that typically when a man pairs with a woman, his testosterone levels ironically go down.
Really?
Which means that we become less of a problem. So if our society makes it more difficult for men to pair with women, it may very well increase problematic behavior. So that's because it's like we're not ideal. I think one of my students the other day was saying how men are scary and she's afraid of men, things like this. Then I pointed out to her, I go, but you also desire men potentially. So fear and desire are kind of the relationship that emerges there. And just like anything else, that becomes something difficult to try to manage. How do you manage it? And wow, I'm old and married for X number of years. And I'm still learning how to manage this. I guess the key element becomes there can be consequences to abandoning the way things have been done in the past, and they don't seem to all be great.
Yeah.
So some of the burdens that people think that they're getting rid of, they may be exchanging for other problems. And I go, I don't know the answer to this, right? I'm not Nostradamus or anything along these lines. So when I think about these things, I go, yeah, how do these things play out? And I go, they're always going to be complicated.
Yeah.
And there's going to be good things, there's going to be bad things. You can try to accentuate and maximize the good things and minimize the bad things, but that requires intelligence, judgment, and skill. So if our political leaders are all of a sudden smart enough to go, oh yeah, no, we have to stop telling people they're lazy and stupid and useless, and we have to make sure that everybody who contributes to the society feels embraced and so on. If we do that, we can make things better. But if the kind of the hateful fear and that people have hate and fear, because one of the responses I often have when I'm kind of overwhelmed with everything is I'm going, I just wish the people who don't agree with me disappear. But they won't, unless I do something horrible, and then I don't want that to happen. And so then it comes down to, how do I live in this world, find significance in this world, and amidst the complexities of it all, trying to leave it as a better place. And I guess that's what I would advice I would give to Gen Z, which is you're going to face lots of challenges. We don't know what they're going to be exactly yet. It could be the challenge from overwork, overstimulation, or it could be the challenge from being completely ostracized from the mainstream economy potentially. So there are lots of problems there. And so you're going, which way do I want to go?
But good luck.
Yeah, well, there will be a meaningful path forward, and a worse way. There will be many bad ways and many good ways that you can address whatever condition you find yourself in.
But you gotta figure it out, right?
You gotta, and as I told you, like my one student who said that, it took 14 weeks to get her to say that. I would have hugged you also and said, yes, that's what you have to do. And hopefully we become smarter. We use logic, and we try not to make things horrible. That's the goal.
Try to move with a place of creativity.
Creativity is nice. I like creativity.
Also love.
Love is good. I like love. That kind of good Christian love, agape love, where you just say, "I'm going to care about this person just because they're a human being."
Yeah, and maybe like adaptability, like that'll be good.
You saw how crazy the world was. There are these different scenarios, and you have to be on your toes to find what value you can find, given the nature that the future can be almost anything.
Yeah.
And it can be, and there are a lot of glum scenarios out there. So that will require a lot of love. That will require a lot of empathy, and that will require a lot of adaptability.
Yeah.
And if people collapse into the worst options, which is I just wish the people who disagreed with me disappeared, that will make it very hard to be finding significance on this planet.
Which is happening right now, actually. If you think about it, like a lot of people, if you don't agree with them, you know.
Yeah, they just want to say you don't exist.
Yeah.
No. Absolutely. I have friends. They're economists. They're smart people. They always think they'll argue as if their position's absolutely true, and if anybody else disagrees with them, they're an idiot. And I always point out, I go, yes, maybe I'm the stupidest person on earth, but I have this opinion, and I feel that I have the right to advocate for myself, and I don't deny anybody else the right to advocate for themselves. They might be wrong, they might be mistaken, maybe I can help them figure out a better way forward or something along those lines. But I have to acknowledge that everybody has the right to advocate for themselves. And if I do that, I might recognize their self-promotion is weak, which means they're not going to win. But it doesn't mean that I have to think they have to shut up forever with a boot on their face, stomping on their face forever and ever and ever. I have to say they still have the dignity to advocate for themselves. Wasn't a good argument this time. Maybe next time they'll raise a point that's very significant and deserves consideration.
But I think that every point should be backed with information, not with a lot of emotion, you know?
Well, but emotion is a data point, isn't it? So that's one of the things that we start to, but I agree with you that we have to try to be rational and things like this. And so if I have a better perspective of things and I see somebody's poorly advocating for themselves and their self-interest, maybe I have a moral duty to try to actually help them to frame their advocacy in a way that's reasonable. So we can actually give them something through the negotiation that they wouldn't otherwise have gotten, that was available for them that they didn't perceive was there.
I agree.
Because some people are just going, well, they didn't get anything, I crushed them, and that's it, and they're stupid. And instead of thinking, oh wow, maybe they just didn't have this information, they didn't have this perspective, but we can do this, and so I can't acknowledge them. Instead of just looking for constantly to be winning. Because when you're constantly winning and crushing other people, well, God, you're leaving people bitter, angry, frustrated, and prone to violence.
Yeah, and that's gonna affect the society as a whole.
Yeah, so we need thoughtfulness.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for just your presence and your knowledge. Do you want to say any last words?
Thank you. You're wonderful. You've got great skills.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a lot, because I definitely did, and it just gave me a different perspective and different things to think about. So anyways, have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next week.